Today we're going to be discussing the HMG turret emplacement, and similarly to my last video, I'll be breaking this into two parts. The first part I'll be discussing enemies the HMG can kill and where the best location is to target, and the second part I'll be going over an in-depth guide for what strategies to use, tips, tricks, and other lesser known information about the HMG emplacement. So without further ado, let's get straight into the video. In terms of automatons, the factory strider is most efficiently killed through its eye. Similarly, the Hulks are also most efficiently killed through their eye weak spots, and tanks of all varieties are quickly killed through their vent weak spots. Note that the barrage tank can also be killed, though it's very difficult to do solo. Gunships are easily killed with a couple of well-placed shots to their engines, and dropships are unaffected. In terms of objectives, the detector tower is unaffected by the HMG emplacement. Similarly, the stratagem jammer is also unaffected, and the AA mortar emplacements and mounted turrets can be destroyed when aiming at their vent weak spots. And in terms of terminids, the Bile Titan can be killed on approach and are killed the fastest through headshots. Chargers and behemoths are killed the fastest through butt shots. The Impaler takes a bit of time to kill, but the HMG rounds penetrate through face armor pretty well, and Stalkers are easily crowd controlled by the HMG turret emplacement. In terms of terminate objectives, the Shrieker Nest can be fully cleared with a full clip of the HMG emplacement rounds, and similarly the Spore Bloom is also destroyed with HMG rounds, and the egg objectives are very easily cleared with the HMG turret emplacement being one of the better weapons to use against this objective. Moving on to part 2 of the video, let's go over some additional tips and go into more of a guided approach. So the HMG turret has a lot more versatility thanks to the new patch, which decreased armor values on heavily armored targets. For example, you can now chip off Bile Titan armor plates on the body for easy access, and similarly chargers can be stripped of their armor to reveal fleshy parts for a teammate in need of assistance. An important part of using the HMG turret is learning what you can and cannot shoot and finding out what is and is not worth shooting. In terms of Bile Titans, unless you are very far away, most likely the Bile Titan will reach you within a couple seconds of initiating fire. So, as I stated previously, the best way to kill a Bile Titan is to shoot their head consistently. However, if the situation calls for it, shooting the fleshy belly of a Bile Titan can be a feasible tactic, especially if the Bile Titan is constantly peeking on you and your teammates. Opening the side of a Bile Titan is not really recommended as a tactic, as it most likely will waste a lot of ammunition without causing extreme damage when compared to its head or abdomen. Also note that you could focus fire on their legs, though again this is not as recommended, as Bile Titan legs are small and mobile targets, leading to possibly missing the majority of the shots as well. Don't forget to stim right before the Bile Titan pukes to make sure that you can survive its attack. Moving on to our next topic, let's talk about the chargers. In terms of chargers, leg shots are a great way to eliminate them, or even shooting directly at their heads can work, though note that when shooting at their head, it has a noticeably slower kill time when compared to their legs and butts. In terms of automaton enemies, this is where the HMG turret becomes very useful. First, let's note that while in the turret, your character seemingly has more health in terms of being able to tank more shots. This combined with the ability to stim while continuously firing makes this a very strong weapon choice. Do note, however, that when the turret emplacement gets destroyed, it'll also cause you to be destroyed with it, so be mindful of your turret's overall health and placement. A cool part of the HMG is that it can penetrate Hulk armor, such as that around all of its limbs, so sometimes it may be helpful to shoot the legs or arms of a Hulk to decrease their lethality to you or your teammates, and note that the Hulks are destroyed when both of their legs are crippled. Also, it's important to note that with some enemies, mainly the Berserker and unarmored foot soldiers, entering the HMG turret allows your character to become invisible and most likely will cause the enemies to root around you while allowing you to hit their weak spots easier and safer. Note that this invisibility also works on some other enemies such as the barrage tank, though most of the time it'll see you, but it just won't attack. In regards to the tanks, a turret can be a great tool for eliminating them, however their mobility and only one main weak spot for kills makes these types of enemies tough to handle, but with the new update brought a new weak spot that comes down the underside of the tanks, though again to be honest it's most likely going to be hidden from view and thus will not be a main weak spot available for damaging. A quick hidden tip is that for the Shredder tank, you actually can damage it through its main armor plate around the sides of its barrel around halfway up its plate, thus making it possible to kill these very quickly and annoying enemies head on without dying. In terms of the barrage tank, it'll not take damage to the majority of its body, and the small weak spot vent present on its back can be hard to hit. If you find it troublesome, try shooting the treads of the tank to immobilize it before attacking its weak spot for a guaranteed hit. Just make sure that when you're immobilizing the tank by shooting the treads, you make sure that the HMG turret is still facing the weak spot in the back of the tank. Don't forget to use the invisibility trick to quickly hide from mouth-mounted machine guns of the factory strider to allow you to aim for its underbelly for a quick and easy kill if you find yourself at an impossibly close proximity to this automaton mammoth. To end off, let me again say that the current HMG Emplacement stratagem is an extremely valuable tool, allowing Helldivers to destroy every single enemy in the game, ranging from weak foot soldiers to heavily armored enemies, both on the automaton and Terminid warfront. Not only will this stratagem help you get out of a wave of oncoming and seemingly endless enemy hordes, it also can be used to help clear a path for your teammates. And most importantly, it has one of the most cinematic and fun to use animations in the game. Now, since this is a remade video, I wanted to take this chance to go over some of the comments you all left in my previous video. So Soham Chowdhury 8173 asked for a more in-depth guide for killing Annihilator tanks. So let me just say that these enemies are going to be one of the most difficult enemies to kill with the HMG turret alone, since their weak spot is on their back and the HMG does not penetrate the armor of the tank, and killing the treads of the tank does not really help in destroying it, unlike the barrage tank, because the vent on the top side of the turret always swivels and moves, so it's going to be very difficult to hit the weak spot of the tank consistently. So if you're only going to be using the HMG turret to kill the Annihilator tank, I would suggest keeping stealth or throwing the HMG turret on top of the tank's head for a surprisingly easy kill. The next comment comes from Akuma stating, against tanks, just hop off the HMG Emplacement and give them a taste of the thermite grenade before hopping back onto the HMG Emplacement. So that's also a tip if you're not going to be using just purely the HMG. Just try switching up your kit and using what you have on hand, especially the thermite grenades that got recently buffed. Moving on, Aegis, or possibly Aegis, added a new nice tip that when using the shield backpack, it also does help in adding extra protection to you and your turret. Kevinus1 asked about stratagem bouncing and overall placement tips for the HMG Emplacement. And for this, let's talk about placement first. So, for the most part, placing the HMG on top of objectives is always going to be a good time, as in high difficulties, those objective locations can get pretty hot pretty quickly. Otherwise, placing the HMG on height, such as on top of rocks or hills, is a great way to clear out enemies below, but even distant objectives, such as Spore Shrieker nests from outside their effective range, can be seen if you place the HMG on high places. And a third tip I would use is that you should always be placing these as much as possible, as the cooldown is under 3 minutes long, and it does a great job at allowing the diver to clear paths to bug breaches or bot drops, clearing the skies for teammates who are in trouble, or even set up an HMG emplacement ahead of time, like placing them on extracts during the early period of a mission for later use. Don't forget to be creative, and don't worry if the HMG emplacement is not perfect, as all the enemies will end up swarming to your location at some point. So even if a rock is blocking the line of sight, hop off the turret until the enemies are right in front of you before getting back on to assert dominance and liberty through an overrun planet. As a final tip, I would suggest putting the HMG emplacement around cover such as rocks or trees, just so you can get out of line of fire if the situation becomes too hot. In terms of bounce, I haven't really had that much problem using this stratagem, but if you start to notice that your stratagem balls aren't going where you need them to, it's usually related to the surface. So on dirt and mud, it's usually pretty good. You can throw it at any angle and it'll stick to where you throw it. But if you're doing it on rocks, make sure that you're throwing straight down, perpendicularly to the ground, and you should be able to stick it to that surface. If you throw it at an angle, like 45 degrees or so, the ball may bounce further on and may even bounce off of what you want it to land on. So that happens. Just make sure that you're throwing straight down or you're just throwing it on the dirt. Moving on, C Says Grub added a tip stating that it's possible to kill AA and mortar emplacements from any direction and not just at their vent weak spots, which I tested and it is very true. Thank you for adding that. Bobby Hill 1138 also added a tip stating, that the legs of the impalers are priority targets for the HMG turret as they allow for faster kills against the impaler, contrary to aiming for their heads. Thank you all for who commented. I hope this additional format at the end of the video helped clear up some of the questions you had, and the additional tips helped those who watched until the end. Again, thank you all for watching. I hope you learned something new. If you did, consider dropping a like, comment anything I missed, and subscribe to see content similar to this one. I'm Twilts, and I will see you in the next video.